Hanımlar, beyler, hepinize saygı ve sevgilerimizi iletiyoruz. Bugün 29 Ağustos 2024 TÜREB ile Yeşil, Deniz programının 6. bölümüyle karşınızdayız. Ben Ufuk Yaman, Deniz Üstü Rüzgar Enerjisi'nden sorumlu başkan yardımcısı. TÜREB olarak Türkiye'nin deniz üstü rüzgar enerjisi potansiyeli konusunda farkındalığı artırmayı, bu alanda özellikle Sanayi ve Teknoloji Bakanlığımız, Enerji ve Tabii Kaynaklar Bakanlığımız tarafından yürütülen çalışmalara katkıda bulunmayı hedefliyoruz. Aynı zamanda yapacağımız bu programla aslında Türkiye'de süregelen gelişmelere katkı sağlamak ve marketin aslında bir fotoğrafını çekmekte istiyoruz. Bunların hepsini bugünkü konuğum olan Afry Hollanda'nın direktörü Imke Maassen van den Brink ile konuşacağız. Bugünkü programda sadece giriş ve kapanış bölümü İngilizce olacak, diğer bölümler Türkçe ve İngilizce dillerinde olacak, diğer bölümler sadece İngilizce olacak. Ancak YouTube yayınımızda altyazısını, Türkçe altyazısını bulabileceksiniz. Ladies and gentlemen, today is August 29th, 2024. We are here with the 6th episode of the Power of the Wind Offshore Energy Insights. With this program, we plan to raise awareness of the Turkish offshore wind energy potential and contribute to the work carried out by our ministries. At the same time, we aim to take a picture of Turkey in the field of offshore wind energy and discuss challenges we may face and ways to overcome them. Today, we will discuss all of these with Imke Maassen van den Brink. She is the director at Afry, Netherlands. Hello, Imke. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and being here with us today.
Hi, Ufuk. Thank you very much for the warm introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Imke, can we start by knowing you a bit, your journey in the wind energy industry, and then maybe some details about your current role?
Yes, of course. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm a director at the Afry Energy division, the wind and solar team in the Netherlands. Together with two colleagues, Albert van der Hem and Roland Steenhuis, we manage this section. And we also manage the Afry Offshore Wind Center of Competence. So I'll tell you a bit more also about my background. I have a technical background in mechanical engineering, and my whole journey in renewable energy business started about 16 years ago within RWE. So within RWE, I've worked mainly at business development and strategy departments, where I led and also supported asset investment decisions and strategic portfolio decisions, both for conventional and for renewable assets of RWE. So about 6 years ago, I changed jobs and I joined the former Blix consultancy team as a manager of the strategy and finance department. As you might know, Blix consultancy doesn't exist anymore because we've been acquired by Afry about a year and a half ago. So when that happened, I was a managing director of Blix Consultancy together with Roland and Albert, which I just mentioned before. And now, we're leading the wind and solar team from the Netherlands. And just to give you an idea about the type of services that we offer, so we basically support all phases of the development of offshore wind, onshore and solar projects, and my specific focus is on the strategy consulting, which is mostly in the earlier phase of the development. And with that, you can think of the LCOE studies we do, for example, for the governments in helping them in the assignment of new wind farm zones, but also, for example, market studies, feasibility studies globally, investment validation studies, for example, to support the TSO by validating their investments on the offshore grid and also reinforcements of the onshore grid. We do a lot of tender support as well, and specifically now with the non-price criteria. So as you can hear, a variety of services in the earlier phase of offshore wind development. And among our clients, you will find mainly developers and governments, but also TSOs and even the supply chain. So that was in short my background.
Thank you. So you've been in the both sides of the coin, let's say, investor and consultancy.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
very big advantage. And yes, the services Afry provides, we are also watching your publications very closely. You provide insights about different markets, which can be a very good example for our market, which is at the ground zero right now. So my next question, what are the current market trends for like tendering and project development in offshore wind energy? And how do you see these trends evolving? Because Turkey is now, we had our first call for tender in 2018, which was not successful. And now we're trying to create a success story. And Turkish Ministry of Energy is working very heavily on this, and we would like to hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, so we see a number of trends. For example, a very clear one is that we see larger sites. So the size of the sites is getting bigger and bigger. I actually have exactly a chart also showing this. So what you see here is over the last decades how the offshore wind farm sites have grown. This is a presentation of actual offshore wind farm sizes, but if we also take into account the sizes of the sites that are currently being tendered, we actually see that the average is even way above what is presented here. We currently see offshore wind farm sites of about 1.5 up to 2 gigawatts, especially in the more mature markets, while in the emerging markets, it's still more smaller sites. And there's also a reason for that. There is a strong relation, for example, with the grid connection. With HVAC, the standard size of a platform is between 400 and 700 megawatts, which also makes sense that you then tender a site which is in a similar size, of course. While for the HVDC grid connection, the platform is normally between 1.5 and 2 gigawatts. So that's also in line with the size of the sites. And the reason for that is, of course, also that HVDC is more often used for sites that are further offshore, and then combined with a larger site. So that's definitely one trend. And what we expect is that this will also, in the next couple of years, that it will maintain for the more mature markets at a size of between 1.5 and 2 gigawatts. However, there are also currently discussions, for example, in the Netherlands, a discussion started a few months ago about reducing the site sizes again, because that will allow for more winning bidders, of course. But I'll come back to that one later, because I know you have another question about what we expect for the future. So that topic will definitely also come back. So another trend is that we see more non-price criteria in the tenders, besides a financial bid. For example, topics like ecology, quality, but also ability to deliver the project on time is a very important criteria. Responsible business conduct, but also criteria related to system integration. This is also supported by the European Commission. They have reported their recommendations last May, where they actually ask the member states and really recommend them to include these non-price criteria, either as a pre-qualification criteria or as an award criteria in the tender. But they also mentioned that it, of course, should avoid negative impacts on the competitiveness, because you still want to keep it objective in the scoring. So that's a very important trend as well. Something that's also shown here in the slides. So we've selected a few mature markets in offshore wind: the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, and Great Britain. This slide is actually an example from one of the reports. It's a public report that we did for the Dutch government a few months ago. They asked us to support them because they needed to make a decision about the new tender design for the upcoming tenders. And we did a very comprehensive analysis about LCOE and also a comparative assessment with other markets. So what you see is that the tender criteria differ among these markets, but well, for these specific markets, they all have some non-price criteria at the moment. Just to give you an example, I mentioned already the Dutch. They have, for example, criteria that support ecology and system integration, but also Germany, they support monopile piling noise restriction via criteria and also job trainee programs. And another example is, for example, that the Danish government, they request from the developers to use recyclable blades. What you can also see is in this chart is the differences among the countries with respect to support mechanisms, which is also a trend that I would like to highlight. We see more and more financially supported tenders in some of the mature, but especially also in the emerging markets. So, for example, well, the UK, they have been using a two-sided CFD. But recently also Norway concluded a tender that includes a production-based CFD mechanism. And also very recently, Italy announced that they will introduce a state aid scheme for the upcoming renewable tenders, including offshore wind. A support mechanism doesn't necessarily mean that they support it financially. You can also have different forms of support, and that's what was just shown in the chart as well. For example, in the Netherlands, what the Dutch government does is that they take care of the grid connection system. And they also tender pre-developed sites. So there's also a difference there among the different countries, not just in the mature markets, but also in the emerging markets. Another trend, and which is also very important also for the developers, is clear offshore wind policies and solid roadmaps. We've seen in the past a few examples where this was lacking, and that resulted in only a few bidders or non-bidders at all in the tenders. For example, in Lithuania, this was also the case. So this is really important as well, that there's a clear policy and solid roadmaps, which also include a pipeline for the development of offshore wind, but also tendering and permitting schemes. Because this, of course, creates trust among the developers, but also the financing institutions. Then the last trend I would like to highlight is the grid connection. That's, of course, a major challenge also for the rollout of offshore wind. We already have existing grid congestion at the moment, and we also see bottlenecks in the supply chain of the grid connection. So this will, together with the delayed grid connections, result in also a delay in the rollout of offshore wind. So luckily also the European Commission is now involved. And what they did a few months ago is that they came up with an action plan for grids. And it's not an obligation, but what they include in that action plan are 14 points with basically recommendations how we can improve the grid connection system, for example, in Europe, just to accelerate the pace of grid development, but also to ensure integrated energy system planning. So one of these items is, for example, that they recommend improved access to finance, but also standardization of the technical specifications, which can relieve the supply chain. So there are a number of recommendations that they do there. But as said, it's a guideline to the member states and it's not an obligation, but it's a good first step, of course. Those were the trends I wanted to highlight for now.
Thank you, Imke. I took a lot of notes. It was a very enlightening summary. As you said, project size are getting larger, but Turkey maybe is in a unique place that you cannot really find good examples maybe within Europe, but in maybe Asia we have Japan. For example, most of our sites right now are near shore. So
Yeah.
we are very close, like our potential sites are very close to the shore, which makes it really not feasible for high voltage DC, and they are already located in the populated zone where there is demand. So for the grid side, we are lucky, but from the wind resource and the other studies that we need for a successful tender, we have complications because it's very difficult to predict the wind resource by using the satellite imagery, unlike the far away offshore sites in the North Sea. So we need to be very careful by choosing the technology that we are going to use for measurements, and we need to collect this data if we want a successful tender.
Yeah.
And what about the technology? Because yes, for nearshore, that is the earliest opportunity for offshore wind to kick off in Turkey. But in the future, we might also benefit from floating wind, as it is expected to get cheaper and cheaper. That is not really happening right now. But I want to hear your opinion about this. What do you think about the recent technological innovations in offshore wind that you believe that it's going to be impactful?
Yeah. Now, floating offshore wind is definitely one of those big innovations in offshore wind, of course. But let's first start with the fixed foundations, because also there we see innovations which are actually already not just in innovation, not just being developed, but also already there, such as, for example, the larger getting turbine sizes. And I also have a picture for that. Yes, there it is. So what you can see here is that, in the last few years, the turbine sizes have increased significantly. About 5 years ago, we were discussing to develop projects of 10 or 11 megawatt turbines, but nowadays the projects start to contract 15 megawatt turbines already, and even looking also at 20 megawatt turbines, which are not there yet commercially, but they are being developed, of course. So that's also what's shown here. What's shown here is what the actual size was of the projects that were developed and were commissioned. The ones I'm talking about are more in the tender phase, of course. So in the current tenders, they include the 15 megawatts and are looking at 20, but they are not there yet. However, there are also debates about this, of course, because it's for some people, and especially also for the supply chain, it also feels as a race to the bottom. And there are very important reasons for that, which are fully understood as well, because at a certain point, it has been shown by several studies that at a certain point, the LCOE starts to increase and not to decrease anymore with these ever increasing turbine sizes. And the reason for that also lies in the difficulties that the supply chain is facing because of this ever increasing turbine sizes. For example, they cannot recover the investment cost of new factories anymore. But also, there's no room for innovation because then already there's a new turbine size that's being developed. Another thing also related to these large turbine sizes, of course, is that they also require larger foundations. And then I haven't even mentioned the larger vessels that are also necessary for the transport and the installation. And that is specifically in a market where there is already a shortage. There is already a shortage in these installation vessels. And now with these ever increasing turbine sizes, it's getting even more and more important and challenging, of course. And then it's not just a cost aspect, but it's of course also a procurement and a planning aspect. What you also mentioned, of course, floating substructures. That's definitely a very important innovation in the offshore wind industry. However, it's not commercially mature yet, and at the moment there are still about 20 different designs in the market. There is, for example, no commercial scale project yet. However, in France, they recently tendered a first commercial scale floating offshore wind tender. And then it will also be very exciting to see how these big turbines will behave on those large floating structures. Because probably also the power curves and the loads might need to be validated again. Another thing that comes with these floating substructures, and that's also what we heard during the conferences, is that there are a lot of discussions about the impact on the cables. So we see that technological improvements are needed for the inter-array cables, for example. So we need dynamic inter-array cables for these projects, and that is also what the supply chain and the industry is currently looking at. Then after that, maybe as a next step, it will be very interesting to also have a look at floating substructures, because that could also be very attractive for the future, of course, once you have a look at a more integrated offshore wind farm, including other technologies like batteries and electrolysis, and then further offshore, of course. So that's something for the longer term. At the moment, we don't hear that the supply chain is actually looking into that already, or not developing it yet, although there will be research, of course. Another innovation that we do expect and also experience already is innovations related to wake reduction. Because you can imagine that with the bigger getting sites, but also a more packed seas and higher densities also of the offshore wind farm sites, that you will have higher wake losses. And what we currently experience is that lots of the offshore wind farms that have been developed in the past, actually they don't operate as well, or they don't deliver as much electricity as was modeled before. Why? Because there was not enough knowledge yet about these long distance wakes, for example. So this is also a challenge that is seen by the governments. So, for example, the Dutch government also initiated research projects to get a better understanding of wake losses within the wind farms, but also in the North Sea, where you currently have a lot of offshore wind farms and more to be developed, of course. There is definitely room for innovation, for the modeling of these wakes, but also more from a technical point of view to develop control strategies, which are driven by software, of course. So then it becomes more of a control system technology innovation. So that's those were the few innovations that I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. You mentioned about wake reduction by, I think, wake steering, right? That is a very important topic, because onshore we are used to having on average like 3-4% wake losses, but at offshore we see like 10%.
Or even more.
High investment costs, like for the foundation and other balance of plant infrastructure. And you also mentioned, it's very interesting, that rapid increase in the turbine size is disrupting the technological innovations at the floating fixed bottom foundation turbines as well. This is a very interesting point. And you mentioned about the tender in France, but I remember I read it. It's the grid infrastructure is going to be handled, grid connection will be handled by the government. But they dropped down to 95 euros per megawatt hour. Before proceeding to my next question, do you think this is really achievable with the European-made wind turbines?
You mean if it is achievable for that price?
Yeah.
I think it will be challenging. Yeah, especially given the increase in LCOE that we've seen over the last couple of years. Of course, up until Well, you could say up until last year there was a significant decrease in LCOE, but now with the current market conditions in the supply chain, the increasing interest rates, the high demands by the government with respect to tender rules and the non-price criteria, there's a lot of competition also among these countries, of course. So I think it will be challenging.
What about the financing? Considering your background in the strategy and finance, what are the most critical financial strategies, especially for the early development stage that we are in right now in Turkey? Like from the financing perspective, what are the points that we need to be careful about?
Yeah, so we do quite a lot of LCOE analysis, and what we see is the financing plays a significant role, and also that has significantly changed over the last few years. But it also differs per developer and per project. So we see as a de-risking measure some that could be supported by the government with respect to the financing part. For example, supporting the demand. If there's the lack of demand and you still have a lot of supply, of course there's a mismatch. It doesn't work. And that is also the feedback that we got from the developers during the study, which I talked about, in which we advised the Dutch government about the next tender design. A lot of the developers mentioned to us, as long as there's no demand, then we are fully dependent on PPAs. And there's also no support scheme at the moment in the Netherlands. So it's highly uncertain, of course. And with that uncertainty, they will apply a high risk premium. So that's definitely something that the government could do. Of course, they can also come up with the support mechanisms that we have mentioned before. Also, what I mentioned before is that solid governmental behavior is very important. So clarity about these roadmaps and the policy. But another one is, for example, smaller projects. What we now see with the larger projects is that there's also larger risks for the developers. And not all of these developers are big enough to handle those risks. Smaller projects could help there. So that's one thing to consider also for governments if they really want to proceed with the 2 gigawatt tenders, or if 1 gigawatt tender would also fulfill, especially because then you will have more bidders, and you will also, it makes it easier for the smaller developers to participate in these tenders. Another thing that we see is that the risks are being divided among different parties within a partnership. So you see partnerships between the pure offshore wind developers and, for example, an investment group. Because this investment group normally has access to lower cost of capital, while the offshore developer has the familiarity and the capability of developing such an offshore wind farm. So that is definitely also a de-risking measure that could be taken. So what's shown here in this chart is how the LCOE has developed over the last couple of years. And you see that the LCOE actually increased. Well, prior to those years, there was a steep decrease of LCOE, of course, for offshore wind farm projects. But you also see the green bar, and that is the financing cost increase. This is mostly influenced by the higher interest rates, but as mentioned before, it also includes this higher risk premium, because the developers experience more risk due to the conditions in the market and the conditions with the supply chain. So what we expect for the future is that, the cost will, or the LCOE will remain largely unchanged for the next couple of years, let's say until 2030. But from that moment on, the whole industry and also the countries where offshore wind is being developed will mature, and we expect to see a slight decrease again. For example, we did such an analysis for the Norwegian government very recently, and there we saw a 25% decrease in LCOE for offshore wind projects up until 2040. So this is all for the fixed foundation projects. For floating, we expect to see a larger decrease in costs. Why? Because at the moment it's of course not mature yet, so there's more room for improvement. So we expect a decrease up to 50% up until 2040, 2050. But what's important to note here as well, you cannot just compare one LCOE with another, because there are different ways to model LCOE, and we have experienced that lots of times. So it also depends on how you calculate the LCOE and what you include in your LCOE. Do you include the WACC, debt ratios, inflation, the tax regime, etc., etc.? And we once actually came in the discussion also because we calculated an LCOE which was 20 euros per megawatt hour lower than the one that a competitor calculated. But when we compared how we calculated the LCOE, we actually came up to the same number because we simply included different things in the calculation of the LCOE. So that's important to keep in mind. Does this answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Smaller projects, of course, will allow more developers to get in, but then it might also drive the LCOE up because of the scale. And I've been following the market for a while now, and I'm seeing that all the forecasts are adjusted upwards for the offshore LCOE. And in most of those forecasts, they were underestimating the cost reduction in the onshore wind, which resulted there is still some potential for reduction there as well. And however, this is I don't agree with the approach, with the view that compares onshore and offshore, because there are different technologies, and if we want to fight the climate change for real, we need all of these resources, because the wind regime is completely different in the North Sea versus southern Germany. And when you have no wind in the southern Germany, you have wind in the North Sea.
Absolutely true.
And then you need less storage mediums. And this has to be taken into account. Thank you, Imke. I think this is all of my questions. If you have final words before we close, please.
Just one final word, and I think it's also the last slide. It's just that we are happy to support the whole industry, of course. So with this, I would like to share also our contact details. Always happy to have a discussion about these kind of topics and support parties with strategic advice, but also for these kind of sessions or workshops or whatever. We will also be present in Hamburg with a huge stand. I think it's in the first hall where you enter. So it would be nice to see you in Hamburg in a month from now, approximately. Yeah. And thank you very much also for this interesting discussion. And keep up the good work. It will be great if you can realize the 5 gigawatts by 2035 in Turkey.
Yeah, that's what we are working for. And thank you again for joining us today. We have reached the end of our conversation with Imke. Your insights were valuable. Thank you very much again, sharing them with us. And a big thank you again to Mesut Kılıç for organizing the webinar series. Let's keep these important discussions about the future of offshore wind energy going. And have a wonderful day. Değerli izleyenler, katılımınız için teşekkür ederiz. Programın başlangıç bölümünü kaçıranlar için YouTube'da bir kaydımız olacak ve burada yine Türkçe altyazı da bulabileceksiniz. TÜREB olarak rüzgarın olduğu her yerde yer almaya devam edeceğiz. Bir sonraki programa kadar esenlikle kalın. İyi günler.